Marshall wasn't dead, but severely hurt. To have his body forcibly thrown into a wall was not a pleasant experience. Although his bones held, he couldn't move and suffered from a horrible ache in his body. Zuma and Rocky got to him first with Chase walking behind them, a confused expression on the shepherd. Zuma had seen it. Chase freezing up seconds before Rocky could have been dragged into a slow death. The lab acted quickly, coming to his brother's rescue, knowing that Chase was unreliable. But it was confirmed his suspicions, and while he kept a straight face around Rocky, a deep rage burned within him. It was time to act, to be rid of the problem at its source. While Zuma kept his new mission a secret, Rocky was more of the vocal type. What the hell was that? The mix turned to Chase, an angry yet concerned look on his face, begging for answers. He held a paw on Marshall's shoulder like he was trying to subtly show that he was cared for the Dalmatian, a gesture he didn't quite understand why he needed to show. Zuma looked up at Rocky's question, also wanting to hear the answer. What? Chase stopped flicking his eyes between his friends. He was still slightly dazed from the odd mental noise that had been following him. You almost let me die, Rocky barked, flattening his ears and bristling his fur. I needed help, and you just stopped moving. A faint grin slid on Zuma's face. I don't know. The shepherd backed up defensively. I just something... What? I was frozen, okay? Frozen? Rocky said flatly. You were frozen? Desperate not to accidentally turn his best friend against him, Chase searched for an explanation, an excuse, anything. Look, that thing has some kind of hold on me. I don't know how to explain it, but it's getting to my head. You're infected, Zuma breathed in awe, narrowing his eyes. What? No! The officer held up his paw to instantly shut down the lab's accusation. Varrock's Miles is way beyond that stage. Couldn't you see that already? Rocky could hardly understand why he was hearing. So why the hell are you saying? I'm saying this has some kind of mental hold on me. It's screaming in me. It's agonizing. I don't know how to make it go away. Chase lowered his ears in shame, embarrassed of how vulnerable he was. Zuma lurked in the back, watching the new conversation. He was ready to carry out his plan of action, but stopped to see Rocky was primed to turn on the shepherd as well. Varrock's malice was just a distraction now. He needed all the help he could get to exterminate the true killer of Paw Patrol. Rocky fought long and hard about what he was hearing, looking at the ground for a moment. I felt that too. You have? Chase looked up in surprise. Zuma's grin instantly died, now replaced with an expression of annoyance. When I went out to check the breakers, the mix recalled, I encountered that thing and watched it kill a rodent. He shuddered at that memory, and I felt something, like this static. Yeah, that, the shepherd stuttered, his tail wagging for the first time in days. That's it. It's maybe freezed up. And it was just difficult to deal with. That may be so, Rocky said, moving towards his friend. But I really thought you were going to let me die there. He stopped before him, looking at Chase with a stern expression. I understand what you're going through, and I'm sorry, but I need you here and now. He reached his gray paw forward and pressed into Chase's shoulder, a sign of comfort and understanding. I know you weren't trying to kill me. I know you'd never do that. So just tell me, whenever the static comes back. It was unnatural to see Rocky take a stand like this. He spoke to Chase like a mentor. Despite being his equal for years, the gray mix had gone almost ignored by the rest of the dogs ever since Varrock's Miles hatched and was simply just always the same, a bystander to the action. While Chase fought against his own mind, and Zuma darkened from the coldness within him, Rocky was going through his own changes. He saw exactly what the Paw Patrol was missing in a time like this. Someone to keep them all together. That creature, it's trying to break us. Rocky flattened his ears as he surveyed the damaged room. If it cannot kill us, then it will snap our sanity and will. He came to the conclusion as he turned back at Chase. Talk to me, Chase, please. I don't want to lose you. If we don't fight this mental strain, it will plunge us into insanity. Hey, Chase chuckled to himself and sat in an expression as he trailed off. Yeah, I know what you mean. The mix tilted his head. You do? Nearby, Zuma sat with Marshall trying to tend to him. The Dalmatian was already beginning to reawaken, a visible strain on his face. The poor firefighter was going through hell with no end in sight. No doubt that the almost innocent of the team. Marshall was viewed by all the different way. Chase wanted to protect him. Rocky sought to educate him in the harsh reality of facing death. And Zuma still cared for him despite being able to see his somewhat dead weight. As he stood over him, Zuma pricked his ears to eavesdrop on his brother's conversation. Trailing his paw along the ground, Chase spoke softly. I feel like I'm not myself. He gave a pitiful sigh as Rocky tried to comfort him like an arm over his shoulder. I can't even tell who I am after what I did. Those last words made Rocky silently stop, hearing the exact same implication in those words, yet restraining himself enough to not provoke Chase. He knew that where this was going, although he still sought to understand the full picture. He wanted to help Chase deep down and bring him back to the shepherd he once was. All he needed was an answer. Chase, he simply said, punctuating his words into narrow eyes. What have you done? He didn't want to tell Rocky the truth. He was the last dog he wanted to ever knowing his crimes. Liberty was an exception, an outsider blessed with cursed knowledge, never to spill onto the others. A street dog with a mutual relationship was worth knowing Chase's terrible mistake. But Rocky was family, even though he had to put the shepherd in a rather compromising position. Zuma had already heard it too, and Rocky was all too observant to the turmoil growing between the two of them. Zuma, go continue on the route. Rocky turned back. Where? The lab stuttered in response. It's where we were headed until we took the other path. We'll be safe for a little while. Just give me a moment with Chase. The lad merely rolled his eyes with a scowl escaping his muzzle, yet he obediently complied. It's not very smart to split up in situations like this. He was going to say something snippy when a thought entered his mind, making the Coast Guard stop and rethink his course of action. He realized right away that splitting up was exactly what he needed, providing him the opportunity to carry out his own plan. Sure, he put on a fake smile. I'll go be brave the death always alone. The lab rolled his eyes and left the room. Zuma scoffed to himself. Conspires, the lot of them. He snuck a look back. I didn't survive all this shit just to watch the German shepherd tear apart my family. He was angry he had to leave, but at the corner of his muzzle, a grin slid up. No one had yet seen what he did. Chase and Rocky were within their own problems in the back of the room. It was all too obvious. Chase was hiding something with great difficulty, a secret his friend carefully tried to extract. You're going to hate me, Chase said, refusing to look his friend in the eye. Rocky was unfazed. Dude, I could never hate you. You're like a brother, maybe not biologically, but it's close enough. He gently tapped the shepherd's arm with his paw. And brothers stick together no matter what. But Chase stammered, I did something really bad. Everyone does something bad. Rocky almost laughed. How are you supposed to get through your life if we have nothing left to learn from? You make it sound trivial. Well, I'm not trying to, the mix shrugged. It's just the truth. Now, what did you do? Bristling his fur, Chase stared up at the dog across from him. You want me to come out and say it? I murdered Skye, he snapped, sparking the volume of his voice for a split second on the final word. I thought she was infected, but she wasn't, so there. He stared into Rocky's unblinking face, expecting hostility or some kind of horrific realization, but it never came. The same reaction that caught the mix Chase off guard, and his anger settled. Giving a long sigh, Rocky spilled his own truth. I know, he said, like he always was wanting to. It just never for finding the right time. It was never easy to pinpoint the exact moment you were completely aware of his crime of your friend had committed. What? Chase blinked. How? It kind of put together over time, the mix shrugged, looking at the floor in mild discomfort. Look, Chase, the thing is, he winced, knowing the next thing was going to leave his muzzle would be hard to say. I don't really know what to think right now. I've eventually figured out that Sky was clean and her death was undeserved. Lowering his head in shame, the police officer nodded as a faint whine sounded from him. I know but, Rocky interrupted him. I also know what was going on at the time, he said, taking a second to scratch himself with his hind leg. There was a great fear going around the tower, and of course, none of us had actually known what Varrock's Miles was yet. He tilted his head a little, reaching his point. What I'm trying to say is, losing Sky was terrible, and I'll miss her every day. Seeing her shot on the floor was just... He slowly turned and began to walk away. Traumatizing. He turned his head back to look at Chase. But in a way, I understand that you were probably thinking at the time you wanted to save us, and you were willing to do such a great sacrifice if it meant putting an end to the unseen terror, he sighed. I guess I'll give you that. But what matters now is that we have each other, and we need to stay together. Rocky soon left the room, unashamed, and Chase behind him, carrying Marshall on his shoulders, even though the mix was willing to forgive the police officer for pulling the trigger on an innocent, given the circumstances. He couldn't deny by aching the void left in his heart. The two of them walked out of the door, looking around the surroundings. So, Chase blinked. Where did Zuma go? Rocky stretched his neck forward, peering down in the dark abyss of the corridor. Not sure. It's not safe to be down here alone. You know we've been trying to get to Ryder's garage this whole time, but I have this weird feeling that we've been going in circles. But we haven't, though. Well, maybe not literal circles, Chase said, rolling his eyes, but the garage wasn't really that far away off from the tower, and we've been traveling a ton of distance. We're not really getting anywhere down here. Taking his word into consideration, Rocky flicked his eyes down on the continuing path Liberty had vanished down. I guess it kinda does feel that way. What, you think Varrock's Miles has been somehow expanding out the basement? That creature is a fucking roller coaster of surprises. Hey, language! Came from the tip-top, taking both dogs off guard and snapping their heads to the side of the shock. Marshall suddenly lifted his head up, confused as to why he was on Chase's shoulders. Why are you carrying me? Marshall? Chase said in alarm, quickly letting the Dalmatian down in pure joy, flooding his voice. Good to see you're alive. The Dalmatian awkwardly stuck out his front paws, trying to stand. Yeah, I am, just in a crapload of pain. I'm glad that you see you're okay. Rocky wagged his tail. We just need to call Zuma and find Liberty. She isn't wearing one of her radio collars. Zuma scares me, Marshall confessed, as he took Daze out of his fur. He's been talking weird all day. Can I just stay with you? Okay, here's a better idea. The shepherd suddenly looked behind him, now looking uncomfortable. Why don't we get somewhere safe and talk there? I'd rather Varrock's Miles doesn't find us first. Nodding eagerly, Marshall was happy to finally be with two dogs he cared about. As they began moving, trekking down the continued path, an odd smell hit the back of his black nose. The Dalmatian almost instantly stopped walking, narrowing his eyes and looking around in confusion, although neither Chase nor Rocky noticed this. As a firefighter, Marshall was highly trained in identifying certain smells that could imply danger was nearby, especially the stench of smoke. He could detect smoke from nearly twice as far as Chase, as skilled, and he loved to brag about whenever he could. Marshall wasn't smelling any smoke, but there was indeed a foreign smell that was suddenly invading his nose. The hallway alone had a metallic, bloody, fleshly stench to it, a smell that they had already gotten used to. This new smell was almost sweet, yet reeked of chemicals, like the smell of hand sanitizer. It was all too faint for Marshall to identify it, but he could tell right away that it was just coming from the ceiling. Looking up at the roof, he couldn't see anything too different from the usual gore mess that had infected the lower floors. Shrugging to himself, Marshall carried on after his two friends. They continued silently for roughly 15 minutes, each dog walking in silence. It wasn't until something caught Chase's eye that they stopped moving. "Those eggs look different," he said, half to himself, and turning his body in the attention to some scattered fleshy capsules placed along the fleshy wall. Rocky and Marshall stopped moving, watching their friends' movements. The mix shrugged off the comment. "Well, not every animal hatches identical to one another." Taking careful steps, Chase cautiously approached the eggs, taking another close look at them while Rocky rolled his eyes. Marshall was going to say something when the odd smell suddenly hit him again, prompting him to look up at the ceiling again. The smell was slightly clearer, bearing a resemblance to metallic rotten eggs. He figured it was just the stench of the biomass that he was smelling, but his gut told him that it wasn't the case. The smell was so familiar to him, yet he still found himself unable to place it. "These are bigger," Chase continued, nudging a rather large egg, "nearly twice the size as the ones we saw." "They must be older." Rocky put a paw to his chin. "Maybe we're getting near the centered hive mind?" "What? There?" "That." The word hung in the air as Rocky tried to put his sentence together. "It's probably the earliest part of the basement Varrock Smiles entered, assuming it snuck back in through the garage." "Wait, we're near the garage?" the shepherd jolted. "You mean we're almost out of this hell?" "Probably," Rocky shrugged. "But we haven't found Liberty or Zuma. We can't leave them behind." Marshall's voice came up from behind. "Does anyone smell that?" The gentle sniffing of his nose was barely heard over the uneasy breathing. Looking back at him, Chase tilted his head. "Smell what? The putrid death we're surrounded by?" "No, it's something else." The Dalmatian shook his head, irritated by wasn't able to instantly place the stench. He was worried that two others wouldn't take him seriously, and that he had a history of being the innocent puppy of the team, even more so than Rubble. Walking forward a little, pushing in between his brothers, he kept his nose in the air, following the smell. "I don't smell anything." Rocky tried sniffing the air. He was angry that he couldn't place it before, but slowly his mind turned, and the stench had grown stronger. A rich, sickly, sweet smell leaching onto his nose. It was almost like a chemical, a liquid that was trailing along the ceiling. It was odd why the other two couldn't smell it, and Marshall wondered if it had something to do with himself. If only he could smell it, it could only be explained by something unique in his ability. "I'm a firefighter," he muttered to himself, making Chase narrow his eyes. The smell was something related to firefighting. Marshall would have loved the smell on the job, or come across it some time earlier. "Marshall, we're wasting time," Rocky said, annoyance in his voice. "Varrock Smiles can be anywhere." The Dalmatian held up his paw. "No, give me a second." It was on the tip of his tongue, and he was so close. Narrowing his eyes, Marshall went through every memory he could think of missions, fighting fires and jumping into buildings. He retracted through his old training, all searching for a link in the stench. A rotten egg-like smell, yet sweet in his nature, a spicy blend of pungent chemicals that ached his nose. It finally hit him, and Marshall spiked his fur in alarm. "Gasoline." "Gas?" he said in surprise, quickly turning back to the others. "There's gasoline coming from the ceiling?" "What?" Rocky blinked, confused. "Brilliant observation, Marshall." Zuma's voice came through of his collar, cold and motionless. "I thought you would have noticed that sooner." "Zuma, where the hell are you?" Chase flicked his own collar on and spoke to it. "That's none of your concern," the lab replied back with a static growl. Marshall desired on his own answers. "Why is there gasoline in the ceiling? Where did it come from?" "It's called the sprinkler system, Marshall," Zuma said as a matter of factity. "I had found the sprinkler control, and all I had to do was flood the pipes with gasoline and trip the systems." "You what?" Rocky drew back in alarm. "Where did you get gasoline from? Are you blind? We've been passing by tons of fuel canisters ever since we came down here. Unlike you, I actually had the plan to rig the sprinkler systems with the flammable fuel, although in most areas of the basement, the infectious biomass has grown over the sprinklers. I'm sure eventually it will start leaking through. Now all I need to do is a spark. Sure enough, Marshall turned his head up in the ceiling and saw a dark stain forming from the living sludge. The gasoline being poured from the sprinkler was now blocked, but was starting to leak through and drip onto the hallway. As I spoke, the gasoline was being showered in every room of the basement, turning the entire floor into a tinderbox ready for ignition. Are you crazy? Rocky shouted into his collar. Are you trying to burn the tower? Yes, actually, Zuma piped up a little. You were supposed to be the smart one, Rocky. I don't know why you didn't see this sooner. The lab sighed into his collar as he walked. But all I've seen is out of you is bad decisions. You heard what Chase said. You heard what he did to Sky. Chase visibly appalled as he began stepping back, realizing Zuma was fully aware of Sky's murder. The lab had officially broadcasted to every dog with his radio collar to listen, and he wasn't finished. How did you even hear our conversation? Rocky demanded, confusion and hurt in his voice. Our collars were off. Not Marshall's. As if on command, the Dalmatian froze, staring shock into his eyes widened. I knew you and Chase wanted me to leave, the vicious lab said coldly. I knew you wanted to share secrets, and you know how much I hate being left out. So before you told me to leave, I clicked on Marshall's collar on, and I listened in to every single thing you said. He let out a laugh escape him, amused on how he got over on the team. I don't understand you, Rocky. You were supposed to be my friend. Why are you giving Chase a second chance? The mix stuttered, trying to get a word as he cycled panicked looks from the other two dogs. He tried to form an answer, but he was overcome with confusion and could only ask more questions. Zuma, what are you doing? I'm doing what none of you have the gall to pull off, the lab shared. I'm burning this entire shithole to the ground. It's the fastest way to get rid of all this infection down here. And Varrock smiles itself. Its weakness is fire. I saw it, and it knows it too. I suggest you free meet me in Ryder's garage. The garage? Chase spoke up. You made it there? It's at the end of the corridor, believe it or not. I have Liberty here. She's shaken. Possibly must have had a run-in with the creature. Is she okay? Relatively. Alright, that's good enough for me. Rocky turned back to the other two. Let's get moving. We'll be out of here yet. Marshall visibly sighed in relief, thankful that the nightmare was about to be over. With a faint smile, he looked at Chase, although his gesture was ignored. The whole situation was setting off red flags in the shepherd's mind. Something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what. His thoughts were more evident on his face as he scanned his eyes along the ground, like he was flicking throughout his thoughts and memories. Oblivious to the unease in the air, Rocky had pushed the team along the final stretch of the hell-bound basement. Much to their glee, the hallway was twisted in a veering turn till a final door finally came into view. Slowly the floor began to emerge from underneath, its old metal surface finally reappearing from the smoldering layer of flesh. It was refreshing to see the infection coming to an end, an energizing feeling to already set a paw down on the solid floor. Approaching the door, an old ladder weathered out wood with flecks of blue paint. Rocky put his paw up against it and nudged it open. Chase stood behind him, pulling a weariness in his heart, telling him to stay back. The direct opposite was Marshall, almost bouncing in anticipation to escape the Varrock Smiles lair and standing right beside his gray brother. Zuma? Rocky said, pushing open the door. Are you... He quickly pulled his face back, twisting his nose as a pungent sniff of gasoline flooded his nose. The door opened to a clean room of electric equipment, although most of them were webbed with dust from years of misuse. The air was assumed to be clean, as if the constant presence of gas wasn't affecting it. The sprinkler fastened the ceiling had already been activated, but instead of water, a steady shower of amber-colored gasoline was flooding out. Since there was nothing obscuring on the device, it was free to fully retain into the room. A dangerous puddle of flammable fluid was forming at a quick rate. Okay, don't step in that. Rocky sidestepped into the room, allowing the wall to circle in the hazard and make it to the end of the room. Wear a dog door sound, and try not to get any on your fur. No shit, Chase quipped. He's really flooding this place. We can't stop it now, the shepherd expressed visible frustration, looking toward Marshall for support, but the Dalmatian didn't respond. It was distressing to see his home flooding with flammable liquid, the sight alone making him shake. No wonder he went behind our backs. As all three of them were gathering at the end of the room, they opened the final door and came to a familiar sight. Zuma turned around. "Oh, there you are!" The pups had never been in Ryder's garage before, and they had seen several glimpses of it during their dispatch, but access to this room was only granted to Ryder alone. The room was exactly how they imagined it. It was a simple, dusty garage with an open floor where the AV was supposed to sit. The side walls were lined with metal shelves, hastily constructed together, carrying sloppily organized tools. Immediately, Rocky rushed over to the shelves to look for the tool he needed to restore the rest of the tower's electrical systems. It had to be there somewhere. He just knew it. Almost interesting thing in the room to Marshall was the garage door itself that stood between them and the freedom was simple door of metal sheets that strung along the ceiling chain. They just needed to open, and they were free to escape to outside. "How does this door open?" Marshall ran over to instantly putting his paws up on the barrier. "Is there a switch or a passcode? Or maybe we could just break through it somehow." "Cool your jets, firefighter." Liberty suddenly appeared from the other side of the room, her hair fur ruffled. Ryder likely kept a remote somewhere. Walking into the room, Chase happily breathed in fresh air that was coming from the outside. Fear was on his mind, remembering what Zuma had heard anything, and he discussed with Rocky. Eager to bury the hatchets, he had approached the lab. Zuma," he awkwardly said. "Listen, about what you heard?" "Not now." The lab waved him off, turning around to face him. "Let's just finish up here and get somewhere safe." He suddenly spiked up his fur, baring his teeth. "Then we could talk about your past actions." Nodding, Chase frantically tried to save their friendship. "So what's next?" "Just one last thing. We need to seal the doors you just came from. It's the only way to the basement from there out there." Chase tilted his head. "There's no other way Varrock's mouths can get out?" "If the elevator's offline, then yeah." Zuma thought for a second. "But those are the vents we have found from outside. Theoretically, it could use those, but assuming that it's still here, it would have to travel a long distance to get it back." He darkened, tapping his paw. "I don't plan to give it a second." "Then let's do it," the shepherd said, eager to finally secure the monster once and for all. Executing the final stage of his plan, Zuma walked over to the door leading to the basement. Using the tools and materials he found on the shelves, he had hastily created some crude locks that needed just to be installed on the door. They were just simple design, built to magnetically seal the door to the wall and bar it from being opened. "I just need you to hold the door." Yeah, Chase sighed and went over, approaching the entrance. Something was wrong. With all the years Chase had spent on force, he had to become an adept and catching certain cues from his surroundings, being able to identify when trouble was afoot without anyone needing to speak a word, was difficult ability to learn, but it served him well. For a moment he kicked himself for never being able to sense Varrock's Mal's presence within rubble, but static firmly occupied his focus, realizing his own thoughts. Chase had scolded himself for his mind for making excuses. Memories and mistakes aside, there was absolutely a bad feeling that was picking at Chase's fur. He even hadn't had the slightest where it was coming from, as he would never in his life believe in his own family would try to hurt him. Was it just nerves? Anxiety? Or was there something malicious walking among them? Something Chase has never even thought to look for. Zuma was watching his every move. As the Coast Guard, the lab was trained to improvise his rescues in the events of harsh weather, of whatever's unpredictable aspects of the sea interfered. Thinking quickly was something he was so good at. and he wrote in his head alternative solutions in the events if something that changed or went wrong. To him, Chase was an unpredictable equation, a denominator that didn't fit, an anomaly that didn't belong. He just wasn't sure of it, but then he knew how the shepherd was dangerous and needed to be dealt with. What am I looking for exactly? Chase nosed the door open, looking back to the gasoline spewing room. Do you want me just to hold it open? Just like that, Zuma said, slowly coming up from behind him. The only one who saw it before what happened was Rocky. The mix briefly turned back to ask Zuma a question, only to see the lab stalking up the truth behind Chase. Instantly he stiffened to alarm and opened his mouth to bark warning, but he was not quick enough. Chase's breath left him as he was forcefully shoved from behind, throwing him into his stomach. He spluttered out a noise of surprise and tried to scramble up in fear and confusion hitting him all at once. Zuma! He cried, looking back at the door where it had been pushed in. The lab's eyes were cold and unforgiving. Goodbye, Chase. The shepherd was helpless as his old friend slammed the door shut, slapping on the metallic lock with the instantly fastened metal surface like glue. The deed was done, deceived and backstabbed. Chase was trapped in the basement as it was slowly flooded with gasoline, and Zuma felt absolutely no remorse. Zuma, what the hell? Rocky rushed over, frantic at what he just witnessed. What are you doing? He made a leap for the door and tried to pull off the lock, only to be shoved away by the defiant Labrador. Snarling at the knocked-over mix, Zuma bared his teeth, a feral demeanor coming over him. I'm solving our problems. Get him out. Can't, the lab shrugged. I made sure the logs wouldn't come off, as it's only fair if he burns alive. Now it was Marshall's turn to whip in shock. What? Rocky tried to get up, but Zuma's brute paw shoved him back into the floor. The Coast Guard was consumed by anger and resentment. He murdered Sky. Why are you protecting him? He snarled. Why have you been giving him any chance at all? Bewildered, Rocky stared up at the lab terrifying stature. With quickened breaths, he uttered the only response he could think of. He's my brother. In spirit, maybe. Zuma rolled his eyes. None of us are related. We don't have to be, came the mix's plea. After all we've been through all these years, we're a family. He's my brother, as he is yours. The lab twisted a snarl at those words. I will not call a murderer my brother. Chase! Marshall pounded on the sealed door. Zuma turned around to the Dalmatian, briefly releasing the grip on Rocky. Panicked, the mix looked at his sides and spotted a discarded wrench sitting aimlessly on the floor. There's exposed wiring in here, Zuma said with a grin. I suggest you back up from the door, or the explosion will be violent. Liberty! Marshall turned to his attention to the dachshund, standing off to the side. Do something! To his complete horror, Liberty only shrugged. It was obvious her face that she was just as horrified as the scene, but there was little she could do to help. The door was sealed, with Chase on the other side, and none of the other dogs had the strength or tools to bust the magnetic locks or break the door down. Make peace with whatever god you believe in, Chase. Zuma shoved Marshall aside, moving to the door, because in a few short seconds you're all going to be... The lab was silenced as a metal wrench slammed off the back of his head, knocking him to the ground unconscious. Never in his life did Rocky think he would strike Zuma, but the situation was dire and the lab needed to be subdued. Even he whimpered faintly. Marshall staggered up the best of his ability. Crawling over to Zuma, even after witnessing the lab's twisted crime, he still felt compelled to his injuries. Rocky dropped off the wrench from his mouth, and its old metal now stained with the splash of Zuma's blood. It hit the floor with a clang, a shriek of noise in the cold silence. Chase! The mix jumped in the door, trying to wrench it loose from with any strength he had. Can you hear me? It was hopeless. Whatever Zuma had locked the door was staying put, and would not continue to do so until heavy firepower was involved. On the other side, Chase was panicking to a severe degree. He half expected his static sound to return, but instead all he heard was a splashing of gasoline as it slowly began to cover the floor. Whimpering in fear, he tried to back himself to the wall, knowing that even a splash in the fuel hit him, he'd be a dead dog when the sparks flew. His heart was broken, fighting between anger and mourning. He had been betrayed, backstabbed by his friend for almost 10 years. Fearful, he tried to call to his remaining family. "Rocky!" he barked, the voice muffled from the other side of the door. "I can hear you! Get me out of here!" Zuma blocked the door. Quickly flinging his gaze around, Chase had tried to survey his options. He had to leave the team if he were to survive. He needed to flee back to the infected basement. The biomass that leached over the walls was covering up the sprinklers, meaning that he only had a few moments of grace period to travel without being splashed by gasoline. Then, Chase tried to think of any possible solution. His heartbeat was moving too fast, and to get a coherent fought through, his paw still pressed against the door with all the smell of gas in his nose. He slowly came to the realization of what had happened. "Just get the garage door open. I'll lead Varrox miles away as far as I can." "But how will you get back?" Sighing, Chase pressed his forehead to the door. "I won't." "Chase, no." "I owe it to you. After everything," he confessed. "The lies, the ignorance, everything. Get that door open and run as far away from the tower as you can." He ran through the layout of the basement in his mind. "Find someone in the ACG and tell them what's happened here." Rocky was still defiant. "Chase, you are our leader." He hit his paw against the barrier between them. "No," the shepherd confessed, starting to move away. "You are." "Chase, no." The cries falling on deaf ears. Chase bit back his tears as he turned away from his family. Taking a deep breath, he turned back to the flooding room and leaped into position. He broke into a run, flattening his ears and streaming back to the infected hallway. He was no longer afraid, even in the face of the death when he felt nothing. His beloved family would be safe, and thus there would be nothing left to fear, not even Varrox miles. The hallway, now ignoring the blistering teeth and flesh that leached the walls, wriggling a path pulsating as gasoline dripped on them. He looked around with determination in his mind. "Varrox miles, you bastard!" he barked as loud as possible. "Come and get me!" He stood with his spiked fur in the middle of the floor, paws firmly planted out as he darted his gaze around. Even while vastly outmatched, he refused to go down without a fight. To prove that monster wasn't invincible, he stood for several minutes. When he realized Varrox miles wasn't coming, likely far away in another part of the basement. "All right, fine." The communication room. This area has seen enough action. It was there that Zuma had found the jammer and restored the connection to their collars. The trash tables and computers glistened orange and red as gasoline rained down from the ceiling. Chase was taking great care to avoid the flammable liquid, but it was almost plausible that the stray drops could hit him. He padded out into the middle of the room, approaching the flowering biomass. Zuma and Marshall had to crawl through, exhaling in agitation. He cracked his neck to the side and tossed himself into it. Bothered by a little the sticky, hot interior of the tight corridor, Chase pulled himself free into a hallway lined with teeth. Glancing to the side, Chase caught a view of a piece of exposed wall where flesh and muscle were cut and pried off. Behind it was the wall panel bent open, revealing a maze of wiring and electrical systems. The shepherd did a double take, realizing that the wires had been cut. The violent sparks were emitting. If one spark happened to land on the liquid fuel that pooled in the ground, it'd be the end of the lookout. Zuma was right. The entire basement was now a death trap. The wires were sparking insanely quick, flickering and spreading like flies. Every second became dangerously closer to the gasoline. "Oh God!" Chase backed up, a faint worry coming over him, but he shook it away fast. He had already accepted death, and he just needed to make sure Varrox miles was taken out with him. "All right, you monster, where?" The vicious sound of screeching cut off his sentence. Chase whipped around him in surprise to see a thriving tentacle birthing from the cluster of muscles behind him. Instantly he turned to face it, although backing up steadily. Then a second tentacle came out, and then a third, and then a fourth. Then a lanky arm reached out of it, flexing its razor bone claws. Lowering himself, Chase stared into the gruesome scene. "You," he said, simply not making even the slightest effort to flee the area. Reaching its second arm out, Varrock's mouth birthed itself out, gripping the claws onto the floor as its head shot out. The sight of it shot Chase's tail under his legs. The creature flattened its torn ears, bearing out its blood-stained fangs as it pulled itself free. Rearing to its fullest height, the creature stared down at its prey, a low hiss emanating from its maw as it awaited for the puppy's move. It craned its neck down and leaned close, meeting Chase nose to nose with a ferocious snarl, staring through the eyes to his every soul. Each one dared to the other to move. Chase hardening his expression while Varrock's mouth bared its teeth, emitting a low, slow, drawn-out roar directly at the shepherd's face, all without breaking eye contact the entire time. "What?" The shepherd was shaking. "What are you?" Varrock's mouth tapped its claws, taking a few steps forward as its tail flicked behind it. Opening its mouth, a sickening snap could be heard as the bones moved improperly and arranged. Tilted its head violently to the right, Varrock's mouth ordered the trapped soul inside to give it up its voice. Realigning its head, the creature did something that caught Chase off guard. It spoke with Rubble's voice. "I am you," it said in a hissing as tentacles holding its body together wriggled. "Just like you are as me." The voice was almost perfect imitation of the bulldog he once knew. The only unsettling tone was hidden underneath, an amateur layering of the sounds and growls attempting to speak. Off to his right, Chase noticed the exposed wiring. The sparks emitted were growing more erratic, and a steady gleam of gasoline was beginning to step towards it. Varrock's malice took another step forward. Chase took a step back, and the stream continued. The creature roared out, this time with Rubble's screaming voice as it interrogated to the sound, and bared its teeth, prompting its prey to run. Although Chase stayed put, the gasoline puddle grew in size, and Varrock's mouth stepped into it without realizing it. Chase found himself backed up against a wall. As he winced, an inhumane screech mocked him. The creature lowered its head and torso, looking like it's about to leap, yet remained in place. The puppy had seen its thorn in its side, and it wanted to torture it as long as possible. Pressing himself towards the raw wall, Chase shut his eyes, only seeing darkness what he thought was his final seconds. The creature began to lean backwards, sitting on its hind legs. Slowly it began to push down, lifting its top torso up, and reached its other stage of evolution. Now towering over Chase, it let its shoulders droop down as the ribcage jutted forward. It was like a walking man, no longer bound to walking on four legs. Snapping its tail around, Varrock's mouth snarled, not even seeing the gasoline leaking under the exposed wiring. Blaring the stolen voice of every soul severed its under his claws, the monster screamed, its outcry, ultimate war cry, ignition. A hurricane of fire erupted in a matter of seconds. The entire basement erupted in a flaming chain reaction. A blast of the heat of fire, cloud of fire consumed them both, a screeching agony roaring out from the monster. The trap was stronger than Zuma could have imagined. The fumes of gas and seeped into the vents, leaking into the full tower itself. When it was ignited, the pressured explosion was not contained in the basement. Gas pipes that lined against the tower broke upon impact, further intensifying the explosion and adding to the destruction. With an instant, upper windows shattered out, explosions climbing up its center, blasting out concrete and debris piece by piece. It couldn't have been heard for miles as a fog of smoke or flame shrouded in the tower as it was shredded apart. The structure made a feeble attempt to keep standing, only its support quickly snapped. The lookout fell, collapsing in a cloud of smoke and fire.